Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and the culture. It's WallBuilders Live. We're talking about today's hottest topics on policy, faith, and the culture. From a biblical, historical, and constitutional perspective, oh man, are all three of those desperately needed in our culture. So be sure you go to our website today at wallbuilderslive.com and share this program and other programs from the website. You can get in the archives there and catch up on shows you might have missed over the last few weeks and months. And that's where you can make the donation. It's a great place to donate and invest in freedom. You need to invest so that our voice can get louder, so we can reach more people, so we can bring truth to this culture. My name is Rick Green. I'm a former Texas legislator and America's Constitution coach. I am here with David Barton, America's premier historian and our founder at WallBuilders, and Tim Barton, national speaker and pastor and president of WallBuilders. And guys, it's, man, I wish I could say we know what happened in Georgia yesterday, but it's too early to tell, I guess. It's super, super tight, lean in one way, but may not know even for another day or so. What's the outcome, you guys think?
Yeah, most indicators are pointing to the fact that it looks like the Democrats will likely take both of these seats. David Perdue has a little better chance than Kelly Loeffler.
And by the way, we are saying this. We just got off air. We've been doing live coverage on elections, and so this is wee hours of the morning. And as we are talking, as we record this, it's super, super tight, and there's still a few counties out, a few precincts out. About 95% are reported. Some people may have the results before this program airs, but we'll see.
Yeah, and places like Savannah had said they would kind of delay their count, which certainly seems suspicious that we don't just stay up late and get everything counted and get everything reported. There's no need to add gasoline to the fire of the people that are already tending to think there's conspiracy and there's fraud when, in particularly Democrat strong cities, they're going to delay giving their results until you see where all the other votes are, and then magically or coincidentally or maybe even honestly, but it just seems suspicious in many cases, that you have just the exact number of votes plus several extra thousand needed for the Democrats to win. Certainly there's a reason people are suspicious. Now, doesn't mean necessarily that it's fraud. It's just there's a reason people are suspicious when you look at what's happened in other elections, certainly back to the presidential election. But right now, it certainly does seem like both of these Senate seats, based on the outstanding votes as at the time we're recording this, the outstanding votes coming from places where you suspect there to be many more Democrat votes than Republican votes, it looks like that both Democrat candidates might win these Senate seats. And certainly, I mean, we can look at the fact that there were some ballot dumps, and certainly in the era where people are very concerned about fraud, those ballot dumps do seem suspicious. It doesn't necessarily reflect fraud. It could be more a reflection that there's just a bad reporting process, that they're going to count several 100,000 votes and then give you that entire number at once instead of reporting the numbers as you go along. And so even though this might not be fraudulent, it certainly does seem suspicious that the Republican candidates were up by tens of thousands of votes and then hundreds of thousands of votes come in that largely went in the Democrat direction. Again, doesn't indicate there's fraud. It might be a bad reporting process in the sense of it just leaves room for suspicion. So,
well, there's a bright spot there in Fulton County. The Republican counters and watchers all went in with life preservers just in case there was a pipe burst. So I don't think they're going to leave tonight. I'm just kidding. They didn't really.
By the way, we will. Since you raised that, we have a friend who is one of the poll watchers in Georgia, and people came in Georgia from all over the nation because they wanted to help make sure this was a fair election that was done by the law. And so the guys who are political operatives that are really pretty good at it, they got assigned to what were considered much tougher districts.
And what we're saying is there's a legal process where you can go and sign up in a state to be a poll watcher, and you take a class, they do a training, you get certified as a legal poll watcher in that state. So it's not just random people showing up that want to go watch the polls. That's not really how it works, because you have to go through training to make sure you understand what is the legal limitations that are placed on you, what legally you are allowed to do, you're not allowed to do, where you can stand, what you can and can't say to people, how you engage people, which is really very minimal. You don't engage people, you don't engage the voters. Your job is to sit there and be quiet and just watch what is going on. But there is a legal process in states where you can go and you can sign up to be a poll watcher to try to help maintain the integrity of the election. And so that's what, Dad, you're referring to. We have a friend who, actually many friends who went to Georgia to help be part of this process, but one in particular who had some pretty interesting things happen yesterday.
And these were guys that were specifically assigned to some of what were called the tougher regions. Our friend was assigned to an area that was 80% Democrat, 20% Republican.
And specifically one of the areas where they suspected there was fraud in the presidential election. So this is one of the areas that certainly they wanted to have more eyes on to make sure that if there was fraud in the presidential election, that it wouldn't happen in this election, or if it did, it would be caught.
And so he's an operative at a really high level. He's done stuff with presidential campaigns and Senate campaigns. And so he's not just a grassroots activist. He's got a lot of knowledge. And so he goes through the 2 days of training. And, basically what you can't do as a poll watcher is you can't interrupt anybody in line. You can't stop the line, stop the process. You can't talk to voters. You are allowed to go anywhere in the polling area and look at the machines and look at the process, look at what's happening, but you can't interrupt. And so he got there as an official poll watcher. The election judge had his name. He's the right poll watcher. The ID is all there. And she says, you go sit over there in that chair 35 feet away from any machine and don't get out of that chair. And wait a minute. Under the law, I can walk around and look at any machine. No, you will not move from that chair. And that happened really all over the state. We got other reports where a guy was not even allowed to get out of the chair to go to the restroom. And so when our friend would get out of the chair and go over, and one of the things they were told to do is every hour, go get the tally number of the machine, say how many votes have gone through the machine, and get all the information. And he would go do that, and they would chase him back. And so he's 35 feet away where he can't see anything, can't hear anything.
And by the way, that's pretty standard information that generally, if you're an election judge, if you're a poll site worker, you're supposed to report the numbers, and it's based on every couple hours. You report how many people have voted. You're supposed to post it on the door. That's supposed to be public information. So in this situation, the poll worker's not going to look and investigate something that's not already supposed to be public knowledge and information. You generally post that outside the poll site so people can come and they can see what the numbers are. They can see how many people showed up, how many people voted, etc. This should be very basic information, and yet he was told, no, you're not allowed to look at anything. You go sit down in the corner, shut up, and don't leave your chair.
And so because he would go check numbers and would go look at things, they actually called the police, and the police came and said, hey, you're about to get arrested. You're disrupting things. And he said, I'm not disrupting. I'm sitting 35 feet away, and once an hour I'm going to check the numbers. You get up again, and you're going to be arrested. And so after the election was over...
And more specifically, they told him that he had to do whatever the election judge at that facility told him. And if the election judge didn't like it, that's when he would get arrested. So if the election judge said, this guy's being disruptive, then the police said, we're going to be forced to come back and arrest you for being disruptive because the judge is the one... And judge not meaning judge like a judicial process judge. It's the election judge, which means the person in charge of the election site. If that person says you're being disruptive, you will be arrested. So even though he was doing nothing wrong, nothing illegal, this election judge, who is a Democrat, was saying, we don't want you watching, we don't want oversight, we don't want accountability, and if you try to do any of that, we're going to get you arrested.
And so part of his responsibility was to be there all day, and then when the election was over, stay there and watch the ballots be loaded into the vehicle and follow them to the tally place. And so he's sitting there. The election is over at 7 o'clock local time, and at 9:20, they finally bring the machines out. Now, there were 12 voting machines in the polling place. It was not a big polling place. 12 machines is really small, and it took them 2 hours and 20 minutes, which is super, super suspicious, maybe 30 minutes. So 2 hours, 20 minutes, they come out. And then when they find out he's going to fall in the polling place, they get a car in and cut him off, and they actually call the police to come get him, and police won't allow him to follow the car. The whole thing was ridiculous. You go, wait a minute. There is laws in place here, and that's what he told the police. Look, I'm following the laws. This is what the law allows a poll watcher to do. No, you're going to do exactly what the election judge said. So it was just crazy stuff.
We used to call this bullying and intimidation and voter intimidation, all those things, right?
Well, you also say, have you guys not been watching the national news from 2 months ago? I mean, don't you know you have a PR problem here in Georgia with the whole nation? Don't you care about being transparent to some degree? And the answer clearly in this situation was no. And
right.
we got reports like that from different people across the state last night on several incidents like this.
And certainly when we're in a climate where you care more about winning than about being truthful or honest or having integrity. And not to say that there was necessarily cheating going on, but when you won't allow oversight, when you're not being transparent, when there's not accountability, it does make you very suspicious if something fraudulent is happening. And that's where certainly there is still reason to be suspicious of fraud, although we're not claiming fraud at this point. There's no evidence. It's just there does seem to be suspicious stuff happening here and there. But at this point, it does look like those two Senate races might end up going to the Democrats, which we likely will find out at some point today what direction those seats will go.
All right, guys, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. There's more happening around the country. Stay with us. You're listening to WallBuilders Live.
This is Tim Barton from WallBuilders with another moment from American history. Alexis de Tocqueville, a political official from France, traveled to the United States in 1831 and penned his observations in the now famous book Democracy in America. Being from France, what he found in America was completely unexpected to him. He reported, upon my arrival in the United States, the religious aspect of the country was the first thing that struck my attention. And the longer I stayed there, the more I perceived the great political consequences resulting from this. In France, I'd almost always seen the spirit of religion and the spirit of freedom marching in opposite directions. But in America, I found that they were intimately united and that they reigned in common over the same country. De Tocqueville recognized that it was biblical Christianity and the morals it produced that made America great. For more information about Alexis de Tocqueville and the positive influence of Christianity in early America, go to wallbuilders.com.
We're back here on WallBuilders Live. Thanks for staying with us. Be sure to check out our website today, wallbuilderslive.com. All right, guys, so news out of Georgia, potentially not good, and potentially, now where does that go? So that puts us at literally a 50-50 split in the Senate. What do you guys think happens after that?
Yeah, one of the concerns with it being a 50-50 split in the Senate was that was going to put Kamala Harris, who, if Joe Biden becomes president, Kamala Harris as the vice president would be the leader of the Senate, also known as the president of the Senate. And then if there were any ties, she would be the tiebreaker. And we know when she was in the Senate, she was the most extreme left liberal senator there was, even more liberal than Bernie Sanders based on a lot of the voting analysis data that was out there. And so she would now be the one in charge of dictating and determining what the tiebreak would be if you have Democrats on one side and Republicans on the other. With all that being said, we had a chance to talk to a congressman in Georgia who pointed out when you look at Nancy Pelosi, who was just recently reelected to be the Speaker of the House, she was reelected with less than the majority of all of the members of the full body in the House. The majority of all the members, when there's 435, it is 218 that is the majority. Well, she was elected with a majority of members present, but it was 216. She had 5 Democrats not vote for her for Speaker of the House. And part of the reason they had differences on different issues, but it's interesting thinking about if you look in the Senate and even look in the House where Republicans picked up a lot of House seats, the concern is that Democrats will take very extreme positions and want to fundamentally transform and change America. But what we're also seeing is that even though most Democrats tend to be very liberal, not all of them are as crazy in the liberal direction as others are. And it's very possible that in many scenarios where there is reason to be prayerful, and I don't want to say fearful because we don't need to walk in fear. God hasn't given us a spirit of fear, but there is a reason to be very concerned that Democrats are trying to take us in a very dangerous socialistic direction. There is still reason to consider that it's possible that Republicans are able to pick up Democrats on certain votes on certain issues, and that not everything in the Democrat, liberal, socialist agenda playbook will go forward. And that's what this actually Georgia congressman told us, is he has levels of optimism that they'll be able to hinder a lot of the progress that Democrats want to make big picture, because there is levels of division even in their party on some level.
But the fact that you might have a Democrat Senate, and even if it's 50-50, it'd be a Democrat Senate because of Kamala Harris, a Democrat House, and a Democrat president, if you get those 3 aspects of the legislative side going in the same direction, you could have some really crazy stuff. And We just found that yesterday. We were contacted by a state representative out of Minnesota, and the state representative was telling it, and Minnesota has a Democrat Senate and a Democrat House and a Democrat governor. So if you want to see what kind of agenda might happen when it all goes blue, he was concerned because in Minnesota, every 10 years, they look at their social studies standards for the students in the state and what they're going to teach. And so it's up now. And so he was saying, here's what they're proposing to remove from social studies standards. And so here's the list. He sent us a list. He says, number one, they want to take out the Pledge of Allegiance. And to some area, we understand that's controversial, it's crazy, shouldn't be. But okay, so in a blue state, you want to take out the pledge.
Yeah, not that we agree with it, but
Right.
that one is not surprising on the list. So when we look at the list, there were several things that we went, you've got to be kidding. Pledge of Allegiance wasn't one that caught us by surprise. We check, I get that one. The next several on the list, you're going, you've got to be kidding me.
So we're talking social studies, which includes American history. And what they're proposing to remove is the American Revolution, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, and the Holocaust. Now, try teaching American history.
Yeah, American history without the Revolution is going to be an interesting American history.
Well,
We just spontaneously combusted into America. There was no revolution. There was no
Oh,
England. We
man.
weren't English citizens in colonies. And guys, in the midst of a culture and climate, when we're fighting for levels of social justice, and we're going to deny the Holocaust, like this should be one of the biggest no-brainers ever. How in the world are we going to say we're not going to study and learn about the Holocaust? Like, it doesn't make any sense on any level whatsoever. And yet, this is what is being promoted. And not only are they saying we want to remove these aspects of social studies.
It's not like taking this away is going to leave you with nothing to do. I mean, you're going to have time, so you got to fill it with something. So what are you going to be teaching in place of what you're not going to teach? I mean, you take this out, you're not going to sit there in class and do nothing.
Well, they did have some suggestions of what they could put into social studies to help fill the time. And here are some of their suggestions.
We need to teach, according to them, this is what they're proposing, systemic racism. We need to teach how freedom and democracy excludes certain groups of people. Now, I'm not sure how freedom excludes any group of people, but that's oxymoronic, but that's where they're going. They want to include gender equality. They want to cover Minnesota's juvenile justice program. And grab this. They want to cover reconstruction and analysis of the ideology of manifest destiny favoring whiteness and capitalism. In Reconstruction, I'm not quite sure how that works.
Now, I understand when you are talking manifest destiny, even though I totally disagree with what they're saying, I understand that argument, but you just put manifest destiny and Reconstruction together.
Yeah.
So this is where when we so often talk about as Christians, we have to get engaged in the process. We have to be salt and light in darkness. And for so many Christians we have encountered and engaged over the years, there are many Christians who have felt like, no, we don't need to get involved in some of these areas. We just need to share the love of Jesus and invite people to church. And we've really seen the calling on Christianity in many people's minds. The calling on Christians and the goal of Christianity is just to introduce people to Jesus. It's not really to engage in culture. And because we have not engaged in culture, we have seen this kind of craziness, this moral relativism, this secularism embrace and permeate in education. It's permeating in business. It's permeating in culture and in media and in Hollywood. We can go across the entire board and list in America. And this is what we are seeing. And yet there are many Christians who are still saying, well, we don't need to get engaged in that. We don't need to do that. Now, we know for our listeners, many of you are going, no, that's not us. We want to do something. What do we do? And for many of you in different states, there are different options of things you can do. Guys, I know we need to take a break, but when we come back, let's talk about what are some options of things we can do. What can people do in the states they're in? How can they make a difference seeing where the nation is? And how can we help recorrect course to get America back closer to where she needs to be?
Stay with us, folks. I know sometimes when you have a loss like what we think happened last night, I've been there myself on the ballot. I know what that feels like. And as a nation, for at least for those that are Bible-believing Christians and conservatives, we feel like we had a big loss last night. Listen, I know sometimes you want to just check out and say, forget it. I'm not even going to pay attention. You can't do that. You got to do what Tim's saying. You got to say, what's the next step? What can I do to help turn this thing around? This is one of those duty is ours, results are God's moments, and we have to stay in this culture. We are that generation that did not control the political forces. The culture and the morality and the enterprise folks did not control the political forces. We can do that. We can turn that around. When we come back, we'll talk about how to do that. Stay with us. You're listening to WallBuilders Live. Have you ever wanted to learn more about the United States Constitution, but just felt like, man, the classes are boring, or it's just that old language from 200 years ago, or I don't know where to start? People want to know, but it gets frustrating because you don't know where to look for truth about the Constitution either. Well, we've got a special program for you available now called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green, and it's actually a teaching done on the Constitution at Independence Hall in the very room where the Constitution was framed. We take you both to Philadelphia, the cradle of liberty in Independence Hall, and to the WallBuilders Library, where David Barton brings the history to life to teach the original intent of our founding fathers. We call it the Quick Start Guide to the Constitution because in just a few hours through these videos, you will learn the Citizen's Guide to America's Constitution. You'll learn what you need to do to help save our constitutional republic. It's fun, it's entertaining, and it's going to inspire you to do your part to preserve freedom for future generations. It's called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green. You can find out more information on our website now at wallbuilders.com. We're back here on WallBuilders Live. Thanks for staying with us, and we're talking about obviously what happened last night. Also, of course, what's happening today in Washington, D.C. Nobody knows for sure how that's going to play out. A lot of different views out there and frankly, legitimate arguments, about who has the power to do what regarding the vice president of Congress and whatnot. So we'll see what happens there as well. But David, Tim, in our last few minutes, let's talk about what people can do going forward, because it is hard sometimes to get back up off the mat after a defeat.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is so important that oftentimes as Christian, for whatever reason, gets devalued on some level, which it absolutely shouldn't, but prayer is almost used flippantly in a lot of situations. Like, oh yeah, I'll be praying for you. And too often we are guilty of saying that to people. We're sending our thoughts and prayers, and there's accusations. Well, prayers aren't enough. Well, oftentimes people aren't praying enough, right? And that is a reality. As Christians, we don't always do a good job of praying as much as we should. Jesus, when he was teaching his disciples, you can read in the Sermon on the Mount, he was talking to them about prayer, and he says, when you fast, don't be like the Pharisees. And it's interesting, he says, when you fast, the implication is that is going to be part of our life as followers of God, as Christians, that fasting is part of the process. So not only are we praying, we are fasting. And this is certainly historically something that was very common in the founding era. If you go back and look at proclamations from founding fathers, they would have days of prayer and fasting, calling on their colony and on their state. Even presidents would call on the nation at times to pray and fast for situations. Prayer is something that needs to be part of what we do going forward, because the reality is without God intervening and God getting involved, things are not going to go the direction they need to. We need God's help. And frankly, kind of like what Moses talked with God about in the Old Testament, when Moses told God, look, if you're not going forward, I don't want to go forward. I don't want to go anywhere you're not going to go. I just want to go where you go. This is kind of what our heart should be looking at America. God, we want what you want for America, but prayer needs to be the number one first step. With all that's going on, we know we wrestle not merely against flesh and blood, that there are spiritual things happening. We need to be people of prayer, number one. Number two, I would point out that we have been called to be influencers where God has given us areas of influence. And so the people that are around us, the people that we can connect with, the people that we can reach, the people that we're friends with, we need to engage in conversation and help teach and promote and defend truth in a culture and era that doesn't believe truth anymore, that doesn't know truth anymore. And sometimes the knowing of truth becomes a challenge because we hear so much from different news outlets. People don't even know what's true anymore. How can you defend truth if you don't know truth? This is where we need to help our friends. The more that we are discovering truth and finding out what is true, we need to help pour that into our friends, into our community around us, and certainly as families, right? As parents, we need to help make sure we are pouring into our kids, that we're not only sharing the truth of the Word of God, the truth of the gospel with our kids, but the truth of the reality of how the world operates. Kind of like the laws of nature and nature's God. We're pouring this into the next generation, but we're teaching and training. And then, I mean, guys, we talk about this so often on the program. We have to get involved in the process where we are. We don't need to just look at the big national level and be overwhelmed. We say, no. What can we do locally where we are, whether it be a school board or city council? Or we can go down the list of all the local things that are going on, the mayor and the commissioners and the sheriff and all that's there. We need to get involved in the local level, because the reality is, if we can resolve these problems at the local level and everybody resolves problems locally, all of a sudden there's not these national issues, because everybody's taking care of their community. And this is where we don't need to focus on the big picture so much that we don't see the trees because of the forest, right? We're where we are, where God has us. We're making a difference in the lives of those around us, but we're getting involved locally to be the salt and light that God has called us to be.
Yeah, exactly right, Tim. And that's the way we have to approach this going forward. And folks, we want to keep equipping you and giving you good information and good tools. So make sure you tune into WallBuilders Live every day, Monday through Friday. We're going to continue our Joshua and Caleb approach, no matter how big the giants are, no matter how fortified the cities are, no matter how bad the odds are against us. We're going to keep marching forward, and we're going to go in faith into these fights. We're also going to be strategic and tactical about it. So listen to this program. We're going to have special guests that will help encourage you as well. And we're going to constantly be teaching you about the Constitution and that biblical perspective and that historical perspective that will equip you to be the difference maker in your community. Tim is so right about doing this on the local level. We've got to rebuild this thing from the bottom up, folks, and that begins with you and your community and us in our communities, and we can turn this thing around. Thanks for listening. Be sure and check us out on our website today, wallbuilderslive.com.
We stand undivided, forever